Danny Cooper had never planned to become famous. He was just an engineer on a spaceship. His job was simple. He fixed broken machines. He made sure the water systems worked. He kept the lights running. That was it. The ship was called Horizon's Edge, and it was on a 5-year mission to explore new parts of the galaxy. Danny had signed up because he wanted to see the stars. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, and he had always dreamed of going to space. Now he was here, floating among the stars, and most days he was happy about it. But today was not most days. The alarm had started blaring 3 hours ago. Danny had been eating lunch when the ship shook hard. Red lights flashed everywhere. The captain's voice came over the speakers, telling everyone to get to their stations. Then the Valorians arrived. Danny had heard stories about them. Everyone in the galaxy had. The Valorian Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in known space. They had ruled their part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They did not like visitors. The Valorian warship was 3 times the size of Horizon's Edge. It surrounded them like a wolf circling a rabbit. There was no escape. There was no fight. The captain surrendered in less than 10 minutes. Now Danny stood in chains with 3 other crew members. His best friend Jake Martinez was next to him. Jake was a communications officer, a tall guy with a quick smile who always had a joke ready. He was not smiling now. Behind him stood Amy Lawson, the pilot. She was short and tough, with red hair and freckles. She had tried to fight when the Valorians boarded the ship. It had taken 4 of them to hold her down. The last member of their little group was Chris Bennett, the security officer. He was calm and quiet, always watching, always thinking. Danny had never seen him scared before. He looked scared now. The Valorians had brought them to their home world. The Throne World, they called it. Danny did not know its real name. He just knew it was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The buildings were made of black stone that seemed to absorb the light. The sky was purple. 2 suns hung in the air, one red and one orange. They were taken to the council chamber. It was the biggest room Danny had ever seen. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. Floating orbs of pale light drifted through the air. Hundreds of Valorians sat on stone benches along the walls, watching the humans with cold, curious eyes. The Valorians themselves were impressive. They stood 7 feet tall on average, with blue skin that shimmered like water under moonlight. Each of them had 4 eyes, 2 where human eyes would be and 2 more on their foreheads. Their eyes glowed like liquid gold, but none of them compared to the Queen. Queen Zareth sat on a throne at the center of the chamber. She was taller than the others, nearly 8 feet. Her skin was darker blue, almost like the deep ocean. She wore armor made of silver metal and black leather. A crown of twisted silver sat on her head. She was beautiful. Danny thought this and immediately felt stupid for thinking it. She was also the ruler of an empire that had just captured him. Beautiful was not supposed to be the first word that came to mind. The council asked questions for hours. Why were the humans in Valorian space? Were they scouts for an invasion? Did they know they were trespassing? The council seemed to think every answer was a lie. Danny was tired. He was scared. He was hungry. The chains on his wrists were too tight, and the council would not stop yelling. Finally, Queen Zareth raised her hand. The room went silent instantly. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. She spoke, and her voice was low and smooth. She said the humans would be kept as political prisoners. They would remain in custody until the human government responded to Valorian demands. They would be treated fairly, but they would not be released. Danny felt his heart sink. Political prisoners. That could mean years. That could mean forever. Earth was far away. The government might not even know what had happened to them. He was so tired, so frustrated. So done with everything. He muttered under his breath, not thinking, not caring. He spoke in English, assuming no one would understand. He said, with all that armor and attitude, she would make a cute wife though. Jake made a choking sound. Amy kicked Danny in the ankle, hard. Chris just closed his eyes and sighed, like a man who had accepted his death. But the room did not react the way Danny expected. Queen Zereth's 4 eyes locked onto him. They seemed to glow brighter for a moment. The entire chamber fell into absolute silence. Not the controlled silence from before. This was something different. This was shock. Danny realized with growing horror that she had understood him. She had a translator implant. Of course she did. She was the queen of an interstellar empire. She probably spoke 100 languages. He had just called the supreme ruler of the Valorian Empire cute, in front of her entire council. While he was in chains. He was going to die. He was absolutely going to die. Queen Zereth rose from her throne. She was even more impressive standing up. She walked down the steps slowly, her armor catching the light with each movement. The council members watched in stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. She stopped in front of Danny. He had to tilt his head back to look at her face. Up close, he could see details he had missed before. The small scars on her jaw. The way her skin shifted colors slightly when she moved. The intelligence in her golden eyes. She studied him for a long moment. Danny waited for the order to execute him. He waited for the guards to drag him away. He waited for something terrible to happen. Instead, she spoke. She said, slowly and clearly, that she agreed. The chamber exploded into chaos. Advisors shouted. Generals roared. Someone knocked over a bench. The noise was overwhelming, but Danny barely heard any of it. He was too busy staring at the alien queen, who had just agreed to be his wife. Jake leaned over and whispered that Danny had finally done it. His big mouth had gotten them all killed. Danny could not argue with that. The chaos in the council chamber lasted for a long time. Danny watched as the most powerful people in the Valorian Empire shouted at each other. Some of them were pointing at him. Some were pointing at the queen. A few looked like they wanted to throw something. Queen Zereth stood perfectly still through all of it. She did not raise her voice. She did not show any emotion. She just waited. Finally, she raised her hand again. The silence returned, though it took longer this time. Some of the council members were still breathing hard from all their shouting. She began to explain her reasoning. Her voice was calm and cold, like she was discussing the weather instead of marriage to an alien prisoner. The Valorian Empire was facing a crisis, she said. The royal bloodline was weakening. For hundreds of generations, the queens had married within the noble houses. The same families had been mixing their blood for thousands of years. The result was genetic stagnation. Fertility rates were dropping. Each generation produced fewer children than the one before. The queens were having trouble producing heirs. If something did not change, the royal line would end within a few more generations. The empire needed new blood. Strong blood. Blood from outside. And humans, she continued, were remarkably interesting creatures. Danny listened in shock as the queen listed facts about humanity. She knew a lot about his species. She knew they had survived ice ages and plagues. She knew they had fought countless wars and kept going. She knew they had evolved on a harsh world and thrived there anyway. Humans were tough, she said. They were adaptable. They reproduced easily. And most importantly, they were genetically compatible with Valorians. Scientists had confirmed this years ago. The council members began to mutter among themselves. Some still looked angry, but others were starting to think about what she was saying. Queen Zereth turned back to Danny. She walked toward him again, and he had to fight the urge to step backward. She stopped just a few feet away, looking down at him with those 4 golden eyes. She said that he had the courage to joke about marrying a queen in her own throne room. Perhaps he had the courage to actually do it. Danny's mouth felt very dry. He looked at his friends for help, but they seemed just as lost as he was. Jake shrugged helplessly. Amy mouthed the words, "Just go with it." Chris was looking around the room, probably counting guards and calculating their chances of escape. Danny swallowed hard. He asked if he had a choice in this matter. The queen tilted her head slightly. It was the first emotion he had seen from her. She seemed almost amused. She said he did have a choice. He could refuse and remain a prisoner. His crew would stay in prison too. They would wait for years, maybe decades, for Earth to negotiate their release. Or he could accept her offer and become her royal consort. He and his crew would have freedom and comfort. They would be honored guests instead of prisoners. Danny thought about the cold cell he had been thrown into earlier. He thought about spending years in that tiny room, staring at the walls, waiting for rescue that might never come. He thought about his friends suffering the same fate. Then he thought about his mother back on Earth. She had always told him to marry someone interesting. He wondered what she would think about this. He took a deep breath. He said he would accept, but he had conditions. The council gasped. Several members rose from their seats. No one made demands of the queen. No one bargained with her. This human was either very brave or very stupid, but Zyreth did not seem offended. If anything, she looked more interested than before. She said she was listening. Danny listed his conditions. First, his crewmates would be treated as honored guests, not prisoners. They would have comfortable rooms and freedom to move around. They would not be locked in cells. Second, he wanted the ability to communicate with Earth. His family deserved to know he was alive. And the human government needed to know what was happening. Third, he wanted time. Real time. He wanted to actually get to know Zyreth before any official ceremony took place. He was not going to marry a complete stranger, even if she was a queen. The council members looked outraged. These were not small requests. These were major concessions that would give the humans far more power than prisoners should have. But Queen Zyreth nodded slowly. She said she accepted all 3 conditions. The chamber erupted again. But this time Zyreth did not wait for silence. She simply turned and walked back toward her throne, giving orders as she went. The prisoners would be moved to guest quarters. Communication equipment would be set up. The wedding ceremony would be postponed until further notice. Guards came forward and removed Danny's chains. It felt strange to move his arms freely again. The skin on his wrists was red and sore. Jake stepped closer to him. He spoke quietly, asking if Danny knew what he was doing. Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said he had no idea what he was doing. He was just trying to keep them all alive. Amy came up on his other side. She looked at the queen's retreating form and said this was insane. The whole thing was insane. Chris spoke for the first time in hours. He said it might be insane, but it was also smart. The queen was solving multiple problems at once. She was getting new genetic material for her bloodline. She was creating a potential alliance with humanity. And she was showing her council that she was willing to think in new ways. Danny looked at Chris in surprise. He asked if Chris actually thought this was a good idea. Chris shook his head. He said he thought it was a terrible idea, but he also thought they were stuck with it now. They might as well try to make it work. The guards led them out of the council chamber. Danny looked back one last time and saw Queen Zyreth watching him from her throne. Their eyes met across the vast room. She nodded once, very slightly. Danny nodded back. He had no idea what was going to happen next. He had no idea if he had just saved his crew or doomed them all. But for the first time since the alarms had started blaring on the ship, he felt something other than fear. He felt hope. it was a small hope. A fragile hope. But it was there, burning quietly in his chest. Maybe this would work. Maybe he could figure it out. Maybe a small-town engineer from Ohio could actually survive being engaged to an alien queen. Or maybe he would die horribly. That was also possible. Either way, things were about to get very interesting. 6 months passed, and Danny's life became something he never could have imagined. He lived in the royal palace now. His rooms were bigger than his entire house back in Ohio. He had a bedroom with a bed, so large he could roll over 5 times without reaching the edge. He had a bathroom with a pool-sized tub. He had a balcony that overlooked the capital city. He also had a personal attendant named Corvith. Corvith was a tall Valorian with pale blue skin and a permanent expression of disgust. He clearly hated Danny. He hated waking Danny up in the morning. He hated bringing Danny his meals. He hated explaining Valorian customs. He hated everything about this situation. Danny tried to be friendly. He told jokes. He asked about Corvith's family. He complimented Corvith's work. Corvith responded to all of this by being even more cold and distant. Danny gave up after the first month. Some people just did not want to be friends. His crewmates were doing better than expected. Jake had been given rooms near Danny's, and he spent most of his time learning about Valorian communication systems. He said they were fascinating. Danny believed him. Amy had found the palace training grounds and started learning Valorian combat techniques. The warriors there had been skeptical at first, but Amy was tough and determined. She earned their respect within weeks. Chris had become something of an unofficial advisor. Valorian security officers kept asking him questions about human military tactics. He answered carefully, never giving away anything too important, but building relationships all the same. The communication channel with Earth had been established after 2 months of negotiation. Danny had spoken to his mother 3 times now. She cried during every call. She also kept asking when she could meet the Queen. Danny did not have a good answer for that. But the most surprising part of Danny's new life was the dinners. Queen Zereth had kept her word about giving them time to know each other. Every evening, Danny was brought to a private dining room where he and the Queen ate together. Just the 2 of them. No guards, no advisors. No audiences. The first few dinners were awkward. Zareth sat straight and stiff, speaking in formal language about politics and alliances. Danny sat nervously, trying to use the right utensils and not embarrass himself. He failed at both. He kept making jokes. It was a bad habit. Whenever he felt nervous or scared, he made jokes. He could not stop himself. At first, Zareth did not respond to the jokes. She just looked at him with those 4 golden eyes, her face completely still. Danny thought she must find him annoying. He thought she probably regretted her decision already. But then something changed. It happened during their 3rd week of dinners. Danny had made a particularly stupid joke about the color of the food. It was not even funny. He knew it was not funny. He cringed immediately after saying it, but Zareth's mouth twitched. Just a tiny bit. Just for a second. It was almost a smile. From that night on, Danny paid more attention. He noticed small things about the Queen. The way she relaxed slightly when they were alone. The way she sometimes paused before speaking, like she was choosing her words carefully. The way her eyes changed color slightly depending on her mood. He learned about her history too. She told him one night, her voice quiet and tired. She had become queen when she was barely an adult. Her mother had died in a border conflict, killed by enemies of the Empire. Zareth had been forced to take the throne immediately. There was no time to grieve. There was no time to be young. She had to be strong and cold and powerful from the very first day. She had never had friends. Everyone around her wanted something. Advisors wanted influence. Nobles wanted power. Generals wanted wars. No one talked to her as a person. They only talked to her as a queen. Danny listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood lonely. He had been the weird kid in his town. The one who liked spaceships more than sports. The one who spent his nights staring at the stars instead of going to parties. He knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Zareth looked at him strangely. She asked how he knew she was lonely. Danny shrugged. He said he recognized the look in her eyes. He had seen it in his own mirror often enough. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward this time. It was comfortable. Then Zareth laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath. But it was real. It was the first genuine laugh Danny had ever heard from her. She said he was strange. She said she had met thousands of diplomats and nobles and warriors. None of them had ever made her laugh. Then a human prisoner with a bad sense of humor came along and did what no one else could do. Danny grinned. He said he was very talented. She laughed again, louder this time. From that night on, the dinners became easier. They talked about their childhoods. They talked about their dreams. They talked about the silly things and the serious things and everything in between. Zareth told Danny about her favorite places in the palace. She showed him hidden gardens and secret rooms. She explained the history of her people and the traditions they followed. Danny told Zareth about Earth. He described the blue oceans and green forests. He talked about pizza and movies and the way snow looked when it fell on Christmas morning. He showed her pictures from his phone that the Valorians had let him keep. She was fascinated by everything. She asked 100 questions about human culture, human food, human music. She wanted to know everything. One night, after a long conversation about human holidays, Zareth looked at Danny with a strange expression. She said she had not felt this way in a very long time. She said she had almost forgotten what it was like to enjoy talking to someone. Danny smiled. He said he felt the same way. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her blue fingers were warm against his skin. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. They did not need to. Some things did not need words. Outside the window, the twin suns were setting. The sky turned gold and purple and pink. And in the quiet dining room, two people from different worlds began to understand that maybe they were not so different after all. Not everyone in the Valorian Empire was happy about the arrangement between Danny and the Queen. Most of the common people did not care. They had their own lives, their own problems. The Queen's choice of husband was interesting gossip, but nothing more. But the noble houses were different. The noble houses had been expecting one of their sons to marry Queen Zareth. They had been planning for it, fighting for it, scheming for it. And now a human had taken that prize away from them. General Vorkith was the angriest of all. Vorkith was the commander of the Imperial fleet. He came from the oldest noble house in the Empire. His family had served the throne for thousands of years. His grandfather had been married to a queen. His father had been a royal advisor. Vorkith himself had expected to be Zareth's husband. Now that dream was gone. Danny had seen Vorkith a few times in the palace. The general was impossible to miss. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with dark blue skin and scars covering his arms. His 4 eyes always seemed to be glaring at something. He never spoke to Danny directly, but his hatred was obvious. Jake warned Danny to be careful. He said Vorkith was dangerous. He said nobles like that did not accept defeat easily. Danny said he understood. He said he would stay out of Vorkith's way, but avoiding Vorkith turned out to be impossible. The challenge came on a cold morning, exactly 8 months after Danny's capture. He was walking through one of the palace gardens when Vorkith stepped out from behind a stone pillar. A dozen other nobles followed him. Vorkith spoke in a loud voice, making sure everyone nearby could hear. He said Danny was a coward and a weakling. He said humans were pathetic creatures who did not deserve to stand beside the Queen. He said Danny had no honor and no courage. Then he issued the challenge. It was called the Right of Honor. Vorkith explained it with a cruel smile. Any Valorian could challenge another to single combat if they believed their honor had been insulted. The challenged person could not refuse without being branded a coward forever. They would lose all status, all respect, all rights. Vorkith was challenging Danny to fight. Danny's blood went cold. He was an engineer. He fixed machines. He did not fight. He had never been in a real battle in his life. Vorkith was a trained warrior who had been fighting for centuries. This was not a challenge. This was an execution, but refusing meant admitting that humans were cowards. It meant proving everything Vorkith had said. It meant losing any chance of respect in this empire. Danny looked at the nobles gathered around. He saw their smirking faces. They were expecting him to run. They wanted him to run. He thought about Xyrith. He thought about everything they had built together over the past months. He thought about his crewmates who were counting on him. He accepted the challenge. Vorkith looked surprised for a moment. Then he smiled, wide and vicious. He said the combat would take place in 3 days. He said he looked forward to killing Danny slowly. The news spread through the palace within hours. By evening, everyone knew. Jake, Amy, and Chris came to Danny's quarters, all of them looking worried. Amy offered to fight in Danny's place. She said she had been training with the Valorians. She was good now. She could take VOR. Danny shook his head. He said the challenge was to him. Only he could answer it. Jake asked if Danny had a plan. Danny laughed. He said he was working on it. That night, there was a knock on Danny's door. He opened it and found Xyrith standing in the hallway. She pushed past him into the room, and he saw immediately that something was wrong. She was angry. Angrier than he had ever seen her. Her eyes were glowing brighter than normal, and her hands were clenched into fists. She asked why he had accepted. She said Vorkith would kill him. She said this was foolish and stupid and unnecessary. She said she could cancel the fight. She could order Vorkith to withdraw. She could fix this. Danny shook his head. He said she could not. If she interfered, it would look like she was protecting her weak human pet. It would make things worse. Xyrith stared at him. She said he would die. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke softly. He said maybe he would. But he had spent his whole life running from hard things. He had avoided fights. He had stayed quiet when he should have spoken up. He had taken the safe path every time. He said he was not going to run from this. Not from Vorkith. Not from anything. Not anymore. Xyrith's anger seemed to fade. Something else took its place. Something that looked almost like respect. She stepped closer to him. She reached out and took his hand in hers. Her fingers were warm and strong. She said if he died, she would burn Vorkith's entire house to the ground. She would destroy his family name. She would make sure nothing remained. Danny smiled despite everything. He said that was surprisingly romantic. She almost laughed. Almost. The arena was packed 3 days later. Every noble house sent representatives. The council watched from elevated platforms. Thousands of common Valorians filled the stands, curious to see the human fight. Jake, Amy, and Chris sat in a special section reserved for humans. Amy was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. Jake looked like he might throw up. Chris was perfectly still, his face a mask. Danny stood in the center of the arena. He felt very small. The sand under his feet was red, and he tried not to think about why. Vorkith entered from the opposite side. The crowd cheered for him. He was their champion, their hero, their general. He wore golden armor and carried a traditional blade that hummed with energy. He was massive. He was terrifying. Danny had a standard combat knife. That was it. The fight began. Vorkith charged forward like a storm. Danny barely dodged the first swing. The blade whistled past his head, close enough that he felt the heat. He rolled away, scrambling to his feet. He could not match Vorkith's strength. He knew that. So he did not try. He watched instead. He studied. He used his engineering brain to analyze the problem. Vorkith attacked again and again. Danny dodged and ran. The crowd began to boo. They thought he was a coward. They thought he was just delaying his death. But Danny was learning. He noticed the weak points in Vorkith's armor. He noticed the patterns in his attacks. He noticed a slight hesitation when Vorkith turned to his left side. When the moment came, Danny did not hesitate. Vorkith swung high. Danny went low. Instead of aiming for flesh, he aimed for the power coupling on Vorkith's energy blade. He jammed his knife into the mechanism and twisted hard. The blade exploded in Vorkith's hand. The general stumbled backward, shocked and off balance. Danny kicked his knee. Vorkith fell. Danny was on top of him in an instant. His knife pressed against the general's throat. The arena went completely silent. Danny was breathing hard. His heart was pounding, but his hand was steady. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. He said he yielded. Vorkith had no choice. He yielded. The crowd exploded with noise. Some were cheering. Some were angry. But Danny did not care about any of that. He had won. The weeks after the fight were strange for Danny. He had expected anger from the noble houses. He had expected plots and schemes and more challenges. Instead, he found something unexpected. Respect. The Valorians valued strength and courage above almost everything else. Danny had faced their greatest general in single combat and won. It did not matter that he had used cleverness instead of brute force. It did not matter that he was smaller and weaker. He had stood his ground when everyone expected him to fall. That meant something to them. Nobles, who had ignored Danny before, now nodded to him in the hallways. Warriors who had laughed at him behind his back now met his eyes with something like admiration. Even Corvith, his bitter attendant, began to treat him with less obvious disgust. Vorkith himself disappeared from the palace. He had gone to one of his family's outer territories, supposedly to oversee military operations. Everyone knew the truth. He could not stand being in the same building as the human who had defeated him. Danny did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He simply went back to his life, back to his dinners with Zyrith, back to learning about this strange new world. But things had changed between him and the Queen too. Zyrith looked at him differently now. There was a warmth in her eyes that had not been there before. She touched his hand more often. She laughed at his jokes more easily. She opened up about things she had never shared with anyone. One night, sitting on her balcony under the stars, she told him she had been afraid. Danny asked what she meant. She said she had been afraid that she had made a mistake. When she first agreed to the arrangement, she had been thinking only about politics and genetics and the survival of her bloodline. She had not considered feelings. She had not expected to actually care about him. But watching him face Vorkith, watching him refuse to run, watching him win through courage and cleverness, something had changed inside her. She said she was not afraid anymore. She said she was ready. Danny understood what she meant. The wedding ceremony was held. 3 months later. It was the biggest event the Empire had seen in a generation. Representatives came from every corner of Valorian space. Dignitaries arrived from a dozen other species. Even a small delegation from Earth made the long journey, including Danny's mother, who cried through the entire ceremony. The palace had been transformed. Flowers from 100 worlds decorated the halls. Musicians played songs that blended Valorian traditions with human melodies. The great chamber where Danny had first stood in chains was now filled with light and color and celebration. Danny wore a suit that Jake had somehow managed to get shipped from Earth. It was black with silver trim, tailored perfectly, and it made him feel almost handsome. Zirith wore the ceremonial armor of her ancestors. It was ancient and beautiful, passed down through generations of queens. Silver metal gleamed in the light. Gems sparkled at her throat and wrists. She looked powerful and elegant, and absolutely stunning. They stood together before the council, and the crowds and the galaxy. The vows were a blend of both their cultures. Valorian traditions required promises of loyalty, strength, and protection. Human traditions focused on love, partnership, and support. Zirith promised to stand beside Danny as an equal, not a subordinate. She promised to respect his wisdom and value his counsel. She promised to protect him and trust him and never treat him as less than what he was. Danny promised to support her and challenge her. He promised to be honest even when honesty was hard. He promised to make her laugh at least once every day for the rest of their lives. The officiant asked if there were any objections. Jake's voice rang out across the chamber. He loudly objected to not being named best man sooner. The crowd did not know how to react. Thousands of faces looked confused. Several council members seemed offended, but Zirith laughed. A real, genuine laugh that echoed through the chamber. And then Danny laughed. And then, slowly, the crowd began to laugh too. It was the sound of something new beginning. The sound of two cultures starting to understand each other. The sound of joy where there had once been only formality. The ceremony ended with a Valorian tradition. The couple pressed their foreheads together and breathed the same air for 60 seconds. It symbolized the sharing of life, the joining of souls. Danny closed his eyes and felt Zirith's warmth against his skin. He heard her heartbeat, faster than his own. He smelled the flowers in her hair. When the 60 seconds ended, the crowd cheered. That night, Danny and Zirith stood on the balcony of the royal chambers. The celebration continued far below them, music and laughter drifting up on the warm air. The twin suns had set, and the sky was filled with stars. Zirith leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. She was tired but happy. He could feel it in the way she relaxed against him. She said she still could not believe it. A joke had brought them here. A stupid, silly, dangerous joke in a throne room. Danny grinned. He said his mother had always told him his sense of humor would get him in trouble someday. Zirith smiled. She said she was glad it did. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth floated in its corner of the galaxy. Danny's home. But this was his home now, too. He thought about everything that had happened since that day on the horizon's edge. The capture. The fear. The impossible choice. The dinners and the conversations and the slow building of trust. The fight. The victory. The wedding. It had all started with a joke. A moment of stupidity, really. But it had led to something beautiful. Zirith spoke softly. She asked what he was thinking about. Danny considered the question. He said he was thinking about the future. He said there would be hard times ahead. Political battles. Cultural clashes. 1,000 small misunderstandings between humans and Valorians. Building a bridge between two species would not be easy. But he said he was also thinking that it was worth it. All of it. Every struggle. Every challenge. Every moment of doubt. Worth it. Zirith lifted her head and looked at him. Her 4 golden eyes reflected the starlight. She said she agreed. Danny smiled. He pulled her closer. Below them, the city glittered like a sea of lights. Above them, the galaxy waited, vast and mysterious and full of possibilities. And between them, 2 people from different worlds held on to each other. They had no idea what the future would bring. They only knew they would face it together. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. The stars continued to shine. The celebration continued below. And in the quiet of the balcony, a human engineer from Ohio and an alien queen from across the galaxy began their life together. It was the end of one story and the beginning of another, and it had all started with a joke.